Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the final Sociology of Media Voices after 4 years. I thought, why not go out with a bang? And we sure are going out with a bang. We're going to be talking about one of my passion areas, which is community broadcasting and the importance of having a space where community members can come on, share their views, and really have a voice for perhaps many times unable to be aired on mainstream media or having limited exposure to whole spaces. So it's wonderful to have our great friend Shane Dunlop. Shane Dunlop is the current station manager at Channel 31, has been so for many years. And we're going to have a bit of a deep dive into community broadcasting through Channel 31's 30 years on television and what it's been like, a journey. So for any people who are interested, Shane Dunlop has a span of 25 year history working within the community media sector. He's the current general manager at Melbourne's iconic Channel 31 studios broadcasting. He is the current president of the Australian Community Television Alliance, executive producer of Channel 31's originals content slate, including the Beer Pioneer, Dog Jobs Australia, the Echo Show, Rediscover Victoria, and the Cellar Door New Zealand, which have been aired across Australia on SBS Food, Apple TV, and Amazon Prime. He's also been 6 years part of the Community Broadcasting Foundation, serving as part of the Content Grants Advisory Group, overseeing the development and release of community TV VOD streaming services platform CTV Plus. Welcome, Shane.
Wow, thanks, Ricky. That's quite the introduction.
It sure is, and what an accomplishment. And before we begin, wow, what got you interested to get involved in community television?
It's a long journey, but I had some involvement in community radio, sort of fresh out of high school, really. And so that was really my initial interactions with community broadcasting was through some engagements with a local radio station in Kensington, and then again one in Glenroy. And um, I suppose through my 20s, I was making short films and then doing what most people started to do when YouTube came along, which was make web series and those sorts of things. And somewhere around 2008, 2009, somebody pointed out to me that, Channel 31 will broadcast things like this. And I had never really even thought about the concept of having, stuff that I'd created broadcast on television. And so I explored that as an independent program maker, engaging with the station. And fast forward a few years, the Community Broadcasting Foundation made it so that community television projects could apply for content grant funding, and I applied for a grant through that, was successful, and made a little six-part narrative drama slash comedy called Lee and Gather that aired on Channel 31 in 2012, I'm going to say.
Mhm.
And that essentially led to a pathway to working at the station. I was employed initially to work as part of the sales team. I was just eager to get involved, and so whatever opportunity came up, I was keen to grab. Very quickly, I ended up looking after the production department at 31 and did that for the next 6 years and did things that I suppose the station wasn't doing prior. So obviously that was also a period of time where social media became really important. So, looked at overhauling the station's social media and expanding to different platforms there. We weren't really known for making in-house programs. We were obviously a broadcaster that received external programs and put them out to air, but we started essentially developing in-house content and developed our internship program as well as part of that period of time. And all of that was happening across the backdrop of really tumultuous time for community television. From 2014 to really earlier this year, we were facing existential threats from the federal government with regards to access to spectrum. So a lot of the work I was doing was geared towards trying to find a way to continue to make community television and Channel 31 relevant, making sure we were engaging the community around us, making sure we were doing really interesting things, and providing opportunities to people to get involved. And that was really I guess the moral of the story for my time running the production department. And then early 2020, um, was lucky enough to assume the job as station manager at a really awkward time, I guess, to do that. We had about 6 months left of our broadcast at that stage. We were due to switch off in June of 2020, and uh, a global pandemic hit in that March. So, kind of a baptism of fire, really. And it's been 4.5, 5 years almost of sort of riding the roller coaster that is community television, and essentially aiming to resolve much of the I guess difficulties we'd been having over a decade long period of time with regards to things like access to broadcast spectrum, and all of those challenges that we'd been facing. And we I suppose are at an interesting point in time where a lot of that is starting to be resolved, which is great. So yeah, 13 years in at 31, and it's been a really interesting and enjoyable ride.
Mm. Wow. So now we know a little bit about you, and so do our listeners. So let's deep dive into everything we know about Channel 31. So, what do you think inspired the establishment of Channel 31, and how has its mission evolved over the past 30 years?
Well, as you know, that it's the 50th anniversary of community broadcasting, and that was established in the 70s under Gough Whitlam, was
Mm,
the Prime Minister at the time. I suppose as a concept, in ensuring that there was a pillar of media that was focused on delivering, localized stories and reflecting the community of, broader Australia. And so community radio existed in the 70s. It was in the early 80s that there were groups that were starting to agitate towards, well, there are countries in the world that have community television or public access TV or a variation of that. We have community radio. Why don't we have community television? And so there were groups across the country that began, you know, getting, I suppose, test broadcasts and attempting to sort of lobby for a permanent community broadcaster. And so I suppose fast forward to the early 90s, and we weren't the first in Melbourne, but we're the only broadcaster that's been on for 30 continuous years. And effectively, I guess the goal was to establish something that, like I said, that has the same ethos as community radio, that is reflective of its local community, that provides people an opportunity to be seen and heard. And I think it's something that we as Australians should be really proud of, that we prioritized and have continued to prioritize, because our community broadcasting sector, I think, is world standard, and there'd be many countries who would look to us and think, geez, wouldn't that be amazing if we had something similar? And so, Channel 31 was established to, I suppose, build upon that ethos of community broadcasting, and to provide an avenue for all of the things that we know, to be great about community radio and community TV more broadly. I think we were really lucky in Melbourne in that it's been a really well supported entity, and perhaps by contrast to some of the other community broadcast stations around the rest of the country, Channel 31 has been a beloved part of our cultural landscape, and very well supported. So really, our mission hasn't terribly evolved from those early days, other than that outside of the fact that we had to sort of fight for survival for a period of that time. Um, it's really just the only evolution really is how do we roll with the times, and how do we evolve so that we're making sure that we're in front of the right people, and then we're still engaging with the broader community in the ways in which they want to be engaged. So that's really just about the evolving media landscape and audience trends and media consumption and what they're doing. And is free to air television still the only place that they do that? And so that's probably the only change to our core mission over that time. The general premise behind why we exist and what we aim to do, it has pretty much stayed the same for those 3+ decades.
Mm. Can you share some significant milestones or achievements in Channel 31's history?
Ah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, its establishment in the first place, it was never guaranteed. It was a 10-year process of lobbying the government at the time to um, pass the law that paved the way for a community television service. Then fast forward 10, 15 years, you had another national push to effectively lobby the government of the time to pave the way for community television to make the jump from analog television to digital TV. There was a real
Mm.
fear at the time, we're talking 2008, 2009, where when we were switching from analog to digital, that we would lose community television services by virtue of them just not being supported to make the jump. And so there was a successful, lobbying attempt at the time to make sure that we were included in the digital revolution, which was probably the biggest achievement, of that up to that point. And very shortly after that, we were, I suppose, given the um, or made aware of the fact that there was a desire from the government of the time to effectively get rid of community television, and use the broadcast spectrum that we currently occupy for other usages. And um, that began a 10-year period of effectively fighting for access to spectrum, rallying all of our supporters to effectively voice their concerns for that policy decision. And along the way, we went from being 5 stations across the country to just two, us in Melbourne and a station in Adelaide. Change of government in 2022 and a much friendlier approach towards community broadcasting in general meant that we were able to secure an open-ended broadcast landscape. And effectively, we're now in a position where the future is kind of um, unwritten, and we're working at sort of addressing the final or dealing with the final impacts of what that last 10 years did to the organization. So it's a really optimistic time. But I think, outside of the digital transition, surviving the last 10 years and navigating what was put in front of us during that time and being in a position that we're in now, where we really have a bright future ahead. That's probably the biggest achievement that I would see, for our little station. The fact that we're still standing in 2024 and look like we'll see through to at least the end of this decade, is, well, astonishing to me because I know how close we've been at various times to not being here.
Mm. And what role do you believe community broadcasting plays in today's media landscape?
I think it's still really relevant. If anything, it is even more relevant than it was when it was first established. And that's for a variety of reasons. I think one of the really interesting things that's taken place over the last 30 to 50 years is the media that we consume. Obviously, it's far more fragmented. And so it's not, when I first started engaging community TV, there were 6 options on your TV set.
Mm.
So getting your show on Channel 31 meant that pretty much every household had a very good chance of flicking past whatever you were broadcasting at that time. So it's very different to then. But outside of the fragmentation of viewership and audiences, what you're also seeing is this sort of globalization of content and centralization of things like our news services and what we're seeing in mainstream media is very much generic Australia, or it's coming out of Sydney, or it's coming out of Melbourne, or it's coming out of capital cities, and it's not necessarily reflective of the hyper local communities. And that's the same for radio, for print, for pretty much any media source. And so where we're, I think, you know, really still very important and very relevant is that we are providing, access to a broadcast medium for people who are losing that connectivity to what is being broadcast or being streamed elsewhere. So, people aren't seeing on their screens what's happening in their particular corner of their community, because everything is being centralized, everything's being globalized. We're watching less and less Australian-made content. We're doing all of these things,
Mm,
and community television really, I think, fits the time, because we're the opposite to that. We're the antidote to a lot of those things, and I think that's really where we're getting a lot of our optimism from, and a lot of our enthusiasm for the future, because we know it's not a case of us just existing for the sake of it. We're actually, filling a really positive gap in the market.
mm. And leading on with that, how does Channel 31 foster diversity and inclusivity within its programming?
That's a question I get asked all the time, and it's one that I'm sort of proud um, to know that the answer is, well, there's really two answers. The first is that by virtue of what Channel 31 means to the city of Melbourne and what we've been over the course of the last 3 decades, we achieve that diversity and that, I suppose, true representation of our broader community organically. We almost don't have to try, in a lot of ways, to put in place some sort of mechanism that ensures there's diversity and representation. That exists, um, uh, just because it exists, and it's always existed. And certainly, over the last 10 years, when we've had to focus on just surviving, we've still had a really vibrant, really diverse, really interesting slate of programs that have engaged with the station, that have wanted to be broadcast, and have been really critically important over a particularly tumultuous time for the broader community. And we've not had the capacity to really put in a lot of effort to ensure that that was the case. That was just the case. It was just who we were. It is just our identity, without us really having to worry about it. And so whenever I'm asked, I'm always very proud of the fact that, it's not like we have a diversity policy and we're, actively manipulating or putting in place things that achieve that outcome. It is very much a part of our baseline identity. That being said, you're always wanting to make sure that you're, engaging, and you're um, connecting with the right people, and that you're listening to see who's out there doing things, or who's interested in doing things that work towards that outcome as well. So, um, we're very busy in trying to make sure that we're doing those things and connecting with the right groups and listening to what Vic Screen are saying with regards to what they would like to see with regards to content, what they would like to see with regards to employment opportunities and pathways for people behind the camera, and then other bodies that are looking to support different types of demographics in their journey in creating content and being reflected on screens. So um, it's sort of a twofold thing. It is who we are. We're diverse by nature, but at the same time, always looking to make sure that we're inviting people who may not be aware they can engage with us, to do so. And we've been really successful and lucky in doing that. Well, I guess one of the things too is during COVID, particularly, the whole country, perhaps the whole world, saw a dip in volunteerism and struggling to have people volunteer and engage with whatever their organization was. And in some cases, that's never recovered. And it was the complete opposite for us during those times. Our volunteering and people who wanted to participate in community television stayed the same. If anything, was even more engaged than previously. So to me, that's just another nice thing to let people know. You know, I think there was a real desire to engage with Channel 31 and to make it you know, continue to be strong even during those difficult times.
Mm. And this is going to be a really tricky or complex question for you. What are some of the most memorable stories or programs created by Channel 31 that stand out to you?
Well, I mean, there are the programs that we talk about a lot. You know, there's next, well, this upcoming Saturday we're having our 30th broadcast anniversary gala. And we are at that gala inducting several different participants into our what we're calling the CTV Hall of Fame. We began
Mm.
that last year. And one of our inductees this year is well, obviously we're doing it posthumously, but it's Stella Young, who was a part of a program called No Limits TV. And that was really one of the flagship programs that helped cement um, the perception or the awareness that Channel 31 was an important cultural identity, because we were putting out programs like No Limits when no one else was really doing anything close to that. Similarly, Waleed Ali got his start on a show called Salam Cafe that put forward a panel of people from the Islamic faith who were not necessarily talking about their faith, just talking about things and doing it in a really lighthearted, um, laid back way, and really, I think, bringing a viewpoint to our screens that perhaps Australians had not yet seen with regards specifically to people in our community who were of that faith. They're
Mm.
just two programs that we use all the time, but you've got any number of programs across the years. And I always, just from a personal point of view, my favorite programs are the ones that have been a little bit alternative, left of center, perhaps, and were pushing the envelope with regards to um, what would be considered mainstream entertainment, for whatever reason they might be. I mean, we going right back, there was once a program where it was a quiz program where you would answer questions, and the more questions you got right, the more condiments you got to put on a hot dog. At the end, if you had won, it was essentially a poor man's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Instead of $1 million, it was a hot dog with a lot. But then right through to a program that was done by a friend of mine called Fish Cam. It was a reimagining of the classic fish tank.
Mm.
Obviously used to broadcast back in the 90s when we switched off of a night time. But it was essentially a live comedy slash variety reimagining of that had people like Rove and Will Anderson, Claire Hooper, Tony Martin, and a whole range of others guest starring, and it was completely off the rails. And at the time, it trended on Twitter and was there was. For every one person that thought it was the best thing that they'd ever seen on TV, there were nine that absolutely hated it. But I loved it more for that reason. Um, and so I guess there's two answers to your question. There are the programs like Salam Cafe, No Limits TV, Marngrook Footy Show, and those that were really important culturally. And then there are the shows that personally I enjoyed, and I suppose it's another part of what makes us special is that you are able to see things that mainstream TV wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole because they're risk adverse. Well, we
Mm.
were able to do things that perhaps challenged the conventional ideas as to what was mainstream entertainment.
Mm. Lovely. So, how do you now envisage the future of community broadcasting and what's next for Channel 31?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there are really, really long answers to this, so I'll keep it brief. But um, there obviously the landscape is changing, and as far as what audiences are doing and how they're engaging with traditional free-to-air television is changing. So we're not immune to those changes. We know that that's happening. It's happening for everybody. But there's really still an important role for traditionally broadcast TV to play. And it might be for another 10 years or so where that's the case. Because there are questions around access and the costs involved in having streaming or over the internet content, but also the delivery of news and important when there's a natural disaster or when there's a global pandemic and people are unable to go to faith services or community
Mm.
services that we're able to which we did do. We were able to broadcast into people's homes, and mainstream media would not have done that. So we really were able to pivot very quickly to make sure that we were providing essential services during, critical times. And that's, uh, I suppose, more evidence as to why our traditional TV broadcast is still very important and will remain so for many, many years to come. So that's still a part of our future. But obviously, and you might have mentioned it at the top, we launched a streaming service called CTV Plus a couple of years ago,
Hmm.
and that's currently a website and a mobile device app. And we're in the process of developing the smart TV apps for that platform, which will be on Android TVs, Samsung
Hmm.
TVs, and the Apple TV iOS. But effectively, we're putting a lot of effort and energy into making sure that that is a service that people can begin to engage with in a similar way that they have engaged with our TV signal in the past, and is also reflective of the changing trends in how people engage with television or just content in general. And what's exciting about that is we're also talking to the federal government around how they will support that app, because there's a whole conversation around something called prominence and prominence legislation. I'm not sure, Ricky, if you're across all of that, but it's
Yeah.
effectively, um, uh, making sure that when in the future, when you turn on your TV and you press the apps button, that the first apps you have to scroll past before you get to Disney and Amazon and all of the internationally owned streaming services, you have to go past the local ones, and
Mm.
we're on a path towards becoming one of those apps that you need to engage with before you can go to the Netflixes and the likes. And that's a really critical point in our future, because at that point you're essentially updating what it is, community television, what it actually is. It's still community TV. It's still everything it's always been, except it's now coming through a different delivery method, and also one that is federally endorsed. And for young content creators or any content creators into the future, they hopefully will view CTV Plus in the same way that they've viewed community TV in the past.
And that sort of leads to this really important question. In what ways can the audience engage with and support Channel 31 now and for years to come?
Yeah, well, still, obviously, we're on TV, and it's an interesting. I have conversations with people, and I'm sure, Ricky, you get asked this all the time too. Um, oh, I didn't realize you were still on, because of that period of time where we were being switched off every 6 months, and
Mm.
we've got last minute reprieves, and there would be print and TV stories done on the demise of Channel 31, and you have to. We've had to undergo a really long process of reminding folks that that never actually happened, that we were able to stay on the air, and we're still broadcasting as strong as ever. So that's, of course, and will remain so for many years to come. Our free-to-air signal is still, a major part of our operations and how people can engage with us. But like I said, CTV Plus is the next iteration of that, and we're really proud of it. There's about 150 community TV programs available on that right now, to watch on demand, including Bent TV, which I know you're a part of. And that's a great program that goes right back to our very first night of broadcast, I should add, which is an astonishing feat in and of itself. And we're adding to that constantly, and we're developing that as a key part of our future plans, and we'll be aiming to have that in as many places for people to engage with as possible and as trends dictate. And
Mm.
and hopefully people will continue to see it as a relevant and interesting place to watch content, because that's certainly what we're aiming for it to be.
Wonderful. And so, what message would you like to convey to viewers and supporters as Channel 130 celebrates its unique achievement and milestone?
Only that I think, for particularly for people who live in Greater Melbourne and Geelong, that it's something they should be proud of.
Mm,
I did a radio interview early this week or last week with David Assel on ABC Melbourne, and he brought up a conversation he'd had with comedian Judith Lucy, and he had asked her at some point in time what she thought was the key difference between Melbourne and Sydney. You know, that classic, what's the difference
mm.
between Melbourne and Sydney as a cultural, what are the cultural differences? And her response to him was that the difference was community television and community radio. That in Melbourne, we have embraced those things, that those platforms and those mediums are a critical part of who we are, whether it's Triple R, Joy, 3CR, PBS, or whether it's Channel 31. We're a legitimate part of the cultural landscape. And perhaps that's not the case in other parts of the country. And so as we approach our 30th anniversary, it was a really timely anecdote to be told when I've spent a long time at Channel 31 and I've never heard that particular story. And it helped me sort of put it into perspective a little bit. We should be proud of the way in which we engage community broadcasting in the city of Melbourne. And we should be proud of the institutions that have been going for a really long period of time, like the ones I mentioned. And there's plenty of others. And so I think that's the message, is that be proud of it, whether you engage with it or whether you watch it all the time. Maybe you don't, but or maybe only tune in once every so often. Whatever your engagement with Channel 31 is, I think it's something that people should feel a sense of pride over. That it exists, that it is a world standard community television station that is has very few, parallels across the world, and still very much beloved and engaged with. And I think that would be my message. Yeah, be proud of it.
And I guess what's I think is important is for everyone to really take the time to actually go and watch or download or stream one of the shows. But also, I'm really encouraging everyone to make a comment, whether it's via LinkedIn or your Facebook, and we'll definitely include some of the media tags that you have, because I think it's important for governments to see that people care. Because I know so many people love watching Channel 31, but we need to get more people interacting with our shows. So I guess for me, I would really love to see more people actually commenting on the videos and that, and leaving comments, whether you agree with the show, whether you
Mm,
don't agree, because the more dialogue we have, it gives us the importance of it, gets out there, and I think that's important. And for me, my vision for Channel 31 is really now seeing it on the global stage, because
mm,
I think it is, but I would love to see it more in the UK and in other countries, where they can look at our culture and critique it and get a bit of a real grassroots eye lens into who we are, not
mm.
just what is just commercially produced. So I think having an authentic space as Channel One is so important. And as we leave, what about for you, Shane? What does the future hold for you for the next 2 or 3 years?
Oh, I don't know. I think I've been so um, hyper focused on the survival of the station, and have almost taken that on as a personal challenge to get it to a point where, well, really, where I suppose it can operate without the threat of closure, or having its spectrum taken away, or whatever the existential threat has been over the course of the last 10 years. I would like to be able to get to a point where I feel like that job's done, and that that there's a clean slate for the station, and that it can transform into whatever it needs to transform into over the course of the next few years. As far as what that means for me, I don't know. I think I've been so caught up in the challenge of keeping the station going and navigating the challenges we've had over the last 10 years that I've not really stopped to think about what's next for me. And that's perhaps something I can finally actually start to consider.
Well, it's been absolutely a pleasure speaking with you, and I wish Channel 31 a really fabulous celebrations for the 30 years. And let's see what happens within the next 30 years and where it ends up in the later part of this century.
Great. Thanks, Ricky. Appreciate it.